Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and pleasure to present a very brief recap of Day 2 of the International Conference on Opportunities and Challenges in the Use of Technology in Elections. The past 2 days have witnessed extensive discussions and experience sharing across Africa and the rest of the world on the roles technology has played and continues to play in the continuous and oftentimes difficult efforts undertaken by election management bodies to provide credible, accessible, acceptable, affordable, inclusive, and cost-effective electoral services to voters. This effort, after 3 decades of the second wave of democracy in Africa, appears firmly anchored in the understanding that beyond the organization, management, and conduct of elections, EMBs can, should, and must play additional critical roles in expanding, deepening, and sustaining the quality of elections and of the democratic project in Africa. In pursuing this effort, and in tandem with technological developments across the world, EMBs in Africa have in the past 2 decades turned towards technology to improve the credibility of the electoral process, enhance the integrity of electoral outcomes, as well as address some of the most basic and hitherto intractable challenges in electoral governance. This conference is both a tribute and an attempt to seek deeper understanding of the opportunities and challenges that technology offers and presents to the entire electoral process. Day 2 of the conference can firmly be located within this context. It hosted basically 3 key sessions. The first session was moderated by Professor Andrea de Guthrie of the St. Anna School of Advanced Studies with 4 panelists. The first speaker of that panel was Dr. Nomsa Masuku, Deputy Chief of the Outreach Department of the IEC South Africa, who was represented. Then we had Mr. Antonio Ayo Pereira Xiao, the Director of Finance and Human Resource of the Electoral Commission of Guinea-Bissau. Then the third panelist was Mr. Lansane Dao, Commissioner in the Electoral Commission of the Republic of Burkina Faso. Professor de Guthrie set off the tone of the session by drawing attention to the twin issues of access to information and capacity building indicated in the session's topic, reminding, and in my view correctly, the panel and the entire House of the right of citizens to information and the obligation of states to provide such information under international, continental, and regional treaties. He opined that both the right to access to information and the obligation of states to provide information should constitute central considerations, not only in electoral governance in general, but also in the specific tasks of the provision of electoral services. Beyond access to information, however, de Guthrie drew attention to the significance of capacity building and the creation of opportunities for the continuous training of citizens and electoral administrators. Overall, both issues, that is the issue of access and continuous training, are critical to the professionalization, deepening of accountability, as well as the acquisition of knowledge and skills for all election management bodies. One of the ways to facilitate this would be through reliance on ICT and in particular on online delivery of learning content, although this has a number of challenges which he rightly pointed out. In her presentation, titled The Use of Technology for Access to Information in South Africa, Mrs. Nomsa Masuka drew attention to the significance of electoral legal frameworks as enablers of efforts by EMBs to provide access to information. In the most specific case of South Africa, Section 32 of the Bill of Rights obliges the state to provide information to citizens. Among other things, this seems to have provided the broad operational framework for the IEC in South Africa to rely on and provide a range of technology-related services to citizens and to engage effectively with stakeholders in the electoral and political processes. Thus, technology-related services such as the development of special voting applications that allow voters who could not vote on election day to vote online, result management and related mobile services, result slip scanning, new platforms for voter registration and voter information update, as well as social media have been used to expand access. Masuku warns, however, of challenges related to cybercrime and fake news. In particular, the rise of bots, and bots is spelled B-O-T, the rise of bots, the software that imitates human behavior, and other such practices are real for EMBs and could severely interfere in the delivery of the provision of electoral services. Mr. Antonio Yao Pereira Jao drew attention to the role technology plays in the management of the electoral process. More specifically, he pointed to how technology enhances the work of EMBs, not only in providing information and services to citizens, it also facilitates the broader question of electoral governance. EMBs should, however, ensure, he warns, that the choice and deployment of technology are given careful considerations. Mr. Lansane Dao's presentation focused on the advances Burkina Faso made in the deployment of technology in the electoral process, beginning from the use of biometrics, the establishment of a website for voter registration, the centralization of results management, the integration of voter registration and the National ID Card project, the printing of voters' cards at the point of registration, and the collation and transmission of results. All this, he argued, have broadened access to electoral services by voters in Burkina Faso. On the whole, the first session substantially focused on the use of technology by EMBs to provide access to information and to build the capacity of both citizens and election management bodies to actively participate in the electoral process and to better provide electoral services to citizens. All presentations focus on how technology was used by EMBs to expand access, generally agreeing that the state is obliged to provide information as all countries on the panel have national legal frameworks of access to information in addition to international treaties and statutes. In addition, all countries on the panel use ICT to enable access to information in addition to a range of other services that they provide to voting populations. The second session of the day was on the use of technology in election administration, planning, procurement, staff recruitment, training, and monitoring. This session was moderated by Mr. Peter Wolf, Technical Manager in Electoral Processes International IDEA. And the panelists include Mr. Lamin Lige, Executive Director, National Electoral Commission of Liberia, Mr. Amos Madaha, Head of Voters System Development and Administration, National Electoral Commission of Tanzania, and Mr. Osumani Keita, Head of IT Department, Independent National Electoral Commission of Guinea. Mr. Lige recounted Liberia's experience in the use of technology in the administration, in election administration, and how such technology expanded the Commission's administrative and operational reach to provide services, gather information, and intervene real-time in the management of electoral processes. Liberia used election technology to monitor civic and voter education, enhance gender outreach, manage registration centers, organize electoral training and deployments, and track performance across business processes. This reminds us of the election management system and now the election management, management and support system of the Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria that played crucial roles in electoral governance, monitoring, tracking, supporting, and intervening in electoral activities and processes within the entire electoral cycle. Mr. Lige observes, however, that while technology in election management proves to be a good asset, it is also constrained by, among other things, cost, limitations of internet connectivity and mobile telephony, and inaccessibility of terrains. Mr. Amos Madaha shares the Tanzanian experience with the deployment of election technology in electoral governance over 10 years. One of the key developments that supported the drive towards technology, election technology in Tanzania is the phenomenal expansion in the number of internet users, an increase of upwards of 200% over a relatively short period of time. Election technology not only improved efficiency, it also simplified systems and reduces cost in the experience of Tanzania. Tanzania had used election technology to establish a permanent voters register, as well as to tally and transmit results. One more lesson here, as it appears in other countries, is that there's a need for a legal framework to regulate the use of technology in elections. There's need to canvass stakeholder support and readiness for technology to operate within a particular context. And there's a need also to expand IT structure and network coverage so that such services can be applied across the board. The deployment of technology in elections is, however, according to the Tanzanian experience, threatened by security concerns, a theme that has been recurrent throughout this conference. The last panelist on this panel was Mr. Osumani Keita, whose paper was titled "The Use of Technology in Electoral Administration, Planning, Staff Recruitment, and Election Monitoring." He recounted Guinea's experience, noting that the introduction of technology in Guinea's electoral process has helped increase transparency, security, speed, as well as facilitated planning and monitoring of electoral services. However, he argues that a lot remains to be done to expand and deepen the professionalization of electoral staff in terms of the use of technology. This ended the first two plenary sessions of the day, and day rounded up with a breakout session where 3 groups had 3 topics to discuss to report back to the plenary session later in the evening. I will just briefly summarize what these groups did and highlight some of the recommendations they put forward. The first group was given the task to analyze the use of technology in elections and to focus particularly on constitutional and legal frameworks for the INEC ECOWAS and the ECF SADC countries. The group in general welcomed the deployment of technology in the electoral process as it has potentials to expand and deepen the realms of electoral governance and integrity. However, there is a need also to affirm that the deployment of technology needs to be undergirded by a sound legal framework. There is a need to strike a balance between legislation for enhancing election technology in the electoral process on the one hand, and on the other, an awareness that election technology is dynamic, it changes frequently. And so laws need to be framed in such a way that changes in those technologies can be anticipated. The group recommends a number of policy measures. First, they recommend the enactment of legislation cognizant of technological innovations and their potential to enhance electoral integrity. Consequently, they argue that legislation should be broad enough to allow EMBs to make subsidiary legislation to facilitate the use of technology. 2, stakeholder engagements are essential prior to the enactment of legislation. The advice from this group, therefore, is that intensive stakeholder engagements are necessary in order to ensure the adoption of legislation that can promote the use of technology. Third, they recommend that frameworks for data security and integrity are crucial, and election management bodies therefore need to pay particular attention to developing frameworks for data security and integrity. 4, legal frameworks need to be finalized within reasonable time limits in order to be adopted for electoral purposes. Within the ECOWAS region, the decision of ECOWAS countries is that any electoral amendment or law that is done 6 months, later than 6 months before an election, that law shouldn't be used by the election management body. So 6 months is the upper limit ECOWAS has placed for laws, for modifications, for amendments, for new laws to be adopted for election management bodies to use. And that's one of the recommendations this group is giving. 5th, intensive and effective dissemination campaigns should be undertaken to familiarize all stakeholders with the changes and innovations in the law. 6th, laws should be cognizant of the challenges in the admissibility of evidence. Finally, all laws and regulations must contain necessary safeguards to ensure the sanctity, integrity, and credibility of the electoral process. Group 2 was given the task to analyze the use of technology in public outreach, enlightenment, and election observation. The group drew from and shared experiences across at least 5 countries and 2 organizations on the use of technology in public outreach, enlightenment, and election observation. The experiences in the opportunities and challenges in the use of technology in outreach, enlightenment, and election observation are strikingly similar. Such technologies range from the traditional face-to-face contacts, town hall meetings, telephony and mobile services, as well as print and electronic media, to the use of social media. Across the countries, such tools have provided support in expanding accessibility through the provision of information and support services to voters, as well as for EMBs in monitoring critical projects such as voter registration, result collation and transmission, as well as electoral risk analysis. The group recommends, 1, the development of more interactive and user-friendly websites to encourage voter use. Second, the establishment of Electoral Citizens Center, and I think this was fashioned after the INEC Citizens Contact Center developed by the Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria in 2014. Third, they recommend increased stakeholder engagements in public outreach processes. Fourth, they recommend proper evaluation of security risks in order to protect and to secure data and information. Fifth, outreach programs must include EMB staff so as to ensure adequate flow of information, not just to stakeholders outside of EMBs, but also to staff within EMBs themselves. Sixth, they also recommend that EMBs should ensure relevance and cost effectiveness in the deployment of technology for outreach programs. Finally, they recommend that EMBs should develop a comprehensive IT policy to govern choice, relevance, procurement, deployment, and boarding of technology for public outreach and monitoring of elections. The third group was given the task to analyze the use of technology in promoting inclusivity in the electoral process, and with particular reference to opening up the electoral space for women, for youth, for people living with disabilities, for IDPs, and for diaspora populations. The group opines that the fundamental issue of structural exclusion and marginalization have characterized the groups under consideration. That is, the observation that there's a structural exclusion and marginalization suffered by women, youth, people living with disabilities, IDPs, and the diaspora as far as electoral and other services are concerned. This structural exclusion is not limited to electoral processes alone, but appears in the broader political environment, which is why programs in health, in education, and other arenas are made to provide remedial measures to address such kinds of deficiencies. As such, the attempt, as far as the group is concerned, to deal with exclusion in the electoral arena needs to first understand and deal with broader structural exclusion and marginalization. Only when EMBs take this into consideration can technology as a basis for creating inclusionary trajectories become meaningful. Exclusion and marginalization were understood in these terms, and the immediate groups subject to marginalization were taken into consideration, and the kinds of technologies that were suggested by this group include expansion of access to media such as radio, television, expansion to access to social media such as websites of election management bodies and so on. The group, if you recall, presented a table giving particular types of technology to each group from these marginalized categories of what kinds of technologies will be appropriate to each. This, very briefly, is my recollection of what happened yesterday. I think that I would like to stop here, very briefly.